The Alama County Coroner's Bureau occupies a modest concrete structure on Coliseum Way in Oakland, California, sharing its block with an auto repair business and a Thai eatery that has remained shuttered since 2019. Most individuals pass by oblivious to the activities within those unwindowed walls, which is perhaps for the best. The nature of death work is not a common subject of contemplation for the living, particularly in a county that processes over 1,400 investigable deaths annually. I am Dr. Jennifer Martinez, and my tenure as a deputy medical examiner with Alama County commenced in September 2022, immediately following my forensic pathology fellowship at the University of Maryland. Prior to this, I completed my anatomical and clinical pathology residency at Stanford, where I performed hundreds of autopsies under supervision. However, those were primarily hospital autopsies, clinical cases involving patients who died under medical care with documented illnesses and clear paths to death. Forensic pathology presents a distinct challenge. It involves the examination of individuals who have died suddenly, violently, under suspicious circumstances, or in isolation. The objective is to uncover evidence, not merely pathology. One is tasked with providing answers to families, law enforcement, and judicial bodies. My training regimen was exhaustive. 4 years of medical school, 4 years of pathology residency, and a year of forensic fellowship. I delved into wound patterns, toxicology, forensic anthropology, and crime scene investigation. I even served as an expert witness in mock trials, dissecting numerous trauma cases, overdose victims, homicides, and suicides. I believed myself prepared for any scenario. My first day at Alama County was Monday, September 12, 2022. Dr. Richard Nakamura, the chief medical examiner, conducted a tour of the facility. The building houses administrative offices, investigation units, autopsy suites, a toxicology laboratory, and body storage. The autopsy suite features 4 stations, each equipped with a stainless steel table, overhead lighting, a ventilation system, and an instrument tray. The walls are adorned with white tiles. The floors are sealed concrete with drainage, and the air perpetually carries the scent of disinfectant, which imperfectly struggles to mask the pervasive odor of death. We average about 4 to 5 autopsies per day, Dr. Nakamura explained as we navigated the suite. You'll begin with supervision on your initial cases, then you'll transition to working independently. We have 2 autopsy technicians, David and Lisa, who assist with body handling, evidence collection, and cleanup. Photography is handled either by our investigators or by you. Documentation is paramount. Everything is recorded, measured, photographed, and preserved in strict adherence to chain of custody protocols. He then led me to the body storage area, a spacious refrigerated room capable of accommodating roughly 60 bodies on rolling gurneys. At that moment, perhaps 20 were occupied, each draped with a white sheet and marked with a case number. We're not exceptionally busy right now, Dr. Nakamura remarked. September typically sees a slower pace. However, brace yourself for the holidays. Suicide rates spike, family violence escalates, and drunk driving fatalities multiply. December and January are particularly brutal. My first week was dedicated to orientation, completing paperwork, familiarizing myself with evidence protocols and toxicology procedures, and observing Dr. Nakamura conducting autopsies. His approach was methodical, thorough, and remarkably efficient. He could complete an uncomplicated autopsy in under 2 hours, dictating his findings as he worked, his hands moving with practiced precision. On September 19, 2022, Dr. Nakamura informed me that I would perform my first solo autopsy the following morning. "It's a straightforward case," he reassured me. "An elderly female found deceased in her home by her daughter. No indications of trauma, no suspicious circumstances, likely natural causes. However, she wasn't under medical care, so we need to ascertain the cause and manner of death. A good introductory case for you." I arrived early on September 20th, reviewing the case file before proceeding to the autopsy suite. The deceased was Margaret Louise Hendress, 73 years old, a white female, discovered dead in her bed by her daughter on the morning of September 18th. The investigator's report indicated that a neighbor had seen her alive 2 days prior. She resided alone in a small house in the Fruit Vale district. Her medical history was largely unknown. She did not have a regular physician and rarely sought medical care. The scene investigation revealed no signs of foul play, no medications in the house, no suicide note, and no evidence of drug use. The body exhibited early decomposition, consistent with approximately 48 hours post-mortem. David, one of the autopsy technicians, had already transferred Mrs. Hendress to the autopsy table when I entered the suite at 8:30 a.m. She was a petite woman, perhaps 5 feet 2 inches, and 110 pounds, with thin gray hair and deeply wrinkled skin. The body bag was open, and she was still clad in a pink nightgown. "Morning, Dr. Martinez," David greeted me. He was a powerfully built man in his 40s, with 15 years of experience at the coroner's office. "I've got everything prepared for you. Cameras are ready, instruments are laid out, scales are calibrated." "Thanks, David. Let's begin." I donned my personal protective equipment, surgical scrubs, a disposable gown, a face shield, double gloves, and shoe covers. This was standard protocol, even for cases without obvious biohazard risks. Then I approached the table and commenced my external examination. Mrs. Hendress was in a state of moderate decomposition. Rigor mortis had appeared and subsequently subsided. Livor mortis, the settling of blood to the lowest points, was fixed in her posterior surfaces, consistent with her dying in a supine position. There was some marbling of the skin, a greenish discoloration of the abdomen, and the body had begun to bloat slightly. The odor was present, though not overwhelming, all indicative of approximately 2 days post-mortem in an unrefrigerated environment. I meticulously documented everything verbally, recording my observations on a digital recorder, while David captured photographs. Body is that of a well-developed, poorly nourished, elderly white female, appearing consistent with the stated age of 73 years. Length is 62 inches. Weight is 108 pounds. Body is clothed in a pink nightgown. External examination shows signs of moderate decomposition, including skin marbling, abdominal bloating, and greenish discoloration. No external signs of trauma are immediately visible. David and I carefully removed her nightgown, bagging it as evidence in accordance with protocol. Once she was unclothed, I performed a thorough examination of every inch of her skin surface. There were no bruises, no lacerations, no puncture wounds, no ligature marks, and no defensive injuries. Her fingernails were long but clean, suggesting she hadn't struggled with anyone. Some dependent lividity was present on her back and buttocks where blood had settled after death, but there were no unusual patterns. External examination reveals no signs of trauma, I dictated. No bruising, no lacerations, no evidence of physical assault. Examination of eyes shows no petechia. Examination of neck shows no evidence of strangulation. No track marks or evidence of intravenous drug use observed. I opened her mouth and examined the oral cavity. Her tongue appeared normal, no evidence of biting during a seizure. She had natural dentition with several missing teeth and some decay, but nothing out of the ordinary. I checked her ears, nose, and scalp, all of which appeared normal for an elderly woman who might have died of natural causes. "Okay," I said to David. "Let's proceed with the internal examination." This was the part I'd performed hundreds of times during my training, but this was my first solo case, my responsibility alone. I picked up the scalpel and made the Y incision, starting at each shoulder, meeting at the sternum, then continuing down to the pubic bone. The blade moved smoothly through the tissue. I reflected back the skin and muscle, exposing the chest wall and abdomen. Using rib cutters, I severed the ribs on both sides and removed the chest plate, revealing the heart and lungs. This was always a critical moment in any autopsy, the initial view of the organs in situ before any disturbance. And that's when I observed something that made me pause. "David, can you come take a look at this?" He approached the table. "What's up, Doc?" I pointed at the pericardium, the sac enclosing the heart. "Does that appear normal to you?" The pericardium had an unusual appearance. Instead of the typical smooth, translucent membrane, it looked textured, almost crystalline. There were tiny, regular patterns etched across the surface, resembling geometric designs embossed on the tissue. "Huh?" David uttered. "That's odd. Perhaps some kind of post-mortem change. Decomposition can certainly have strange effects." "Perhaps," I replied, though I remained unconvinced. I had encountered decomposition changes in pericardial tissue during my training, and this did not resemble those. This seemed almost deliberately patterned. I carefully incised the pericardial sac and examined the heart. It was small, proportionate to her body size, and exhibited atherosclerotic changes typical for her age. The coronary arteries showed some calcification, nothing remarkable at first glance. However, as I removed the heart for closer inspection, I noticed the same peculiar pattern on the epicardial surface, the outer layer of the heart muscle itself. Tiny geometric patterns, almost like a lattice or mesh, were impressed into the tissue. This was not a disease I recognized, nor a normal anatomical variation. It was something entirely different. "David, get extra photographs of this, multiple angles, close-ups." While he photographed, I continued examining the thoracic cavity. The lungs exhibited mild emphysematous changes, typical for her age, even without a history of smoking. Yet, on the pleural surface of the lungs, I discovered the identical pattern. Those minute geometric impressions covering the tissue in a regular, organized fashion. "This is truly strange," I murmured. I then moved to the abdominal cavity. I removed the organs en bloc, the standard technique of lifting out the liver, spleen, stomach, intestines, kidneys, and bladder, all together for examination. And on every single organ surface, I found the very same pattern. The liver capsule, the splenic capsule, the serosa of the intestines, the renal capsules. Every single surface bore these minute geometric impressions, as if the organs had been encased in a textured fabric that left its indelible mark on the tissue. I stepped away from the table, striving to comprehend the spectacle before me. Throughout my rigorous training, countless textbooks I had absorbed, and numerous conferences I had attended, I had never encountered anything remotely similar. "David, have you ever witnessed such a phenomenon?" I inquired. He drew closer, meticulously inspecting the organs laid out on the dissection table. "No, Doc, never. And I've been engaged in this profession for 15 years. I carefully lifted the liver, examining it beneath the magnifying glass we kept on the instrument tray. The patterns exhibited astonishing precision. regular geometric forms, perhaps half a millimeter in diameter, completely covering the capsular surface. They weren't significantly raised or depressed. Rather, they appeared to have been imprinted directly into the tissue. I made incisions into the organs, scrutinizing their internal architecture. The liver parenchyma seemed normal, apart from some fatty alterations. The spleen was unremarkable. The kidneys displayed age-related glomerulosclerosis, but nothing acute. The heart presented evidence of coronary atherosclerosis and some left ventricular hypertrophy, yet no infarction, no acute event that could account for sudden death. Nevertheless, every organ surface exhibited these perplexing patterns. Next, I turned my attention to the brain, carefully removing the calvarium and extracting it from the skull. The brain weighed 1,240 grams, which was within the normal range for her age and sex. The leptomeninges, the delicate membranes encasing the brain, also bore the identical geometric patterns. As I made coronal sections through the brain tissue, these patterns persisted on every surface I exposed. The cortical surface, the white matter, the basal ganglia, everywhere I cut, those regular geometric impressions materialized. "I need to contact Dr. Nakamura," I stated, stripping off my gloves and exiting the autopsy suite, leaving David to oversee the body. I located Dr. Nakamura in his office, engrossed in reviewing case files. "Dr. Nakamura, I require your immediate attention to something in my autopsy. I'm encountering inexplicable findings." He followed me back to the suite and approached the table. I presented the organs, highlighting the patterns on every surface, and then showed him the brain sections displaying the same consistent geometric impressions. He remained silent for an extended period, scrutinizing everything with intense focus. "Have you ever observed anything like this?" I finally asked. "No," he responded slowly. "Never. This does not align with any pathological process I recognize." He picked up the heart, turning it under the light. "These patterns are far too regular to be natural, too organized. It's as though something has imposed this structure upon the tissue. Could it be an artifact of some kind? Post-mortem change, embalming artifact, something originating from the scene." "She was not embalmed," I clarified, "and the scene investigation yielded nothing unusual. No chemicals, no materials that could account for this." He examined the liver capsule with the magnifying glass. "The precision of these patterns is truly remarkable. Each geometric shape is identical to the others. Such uniformity simply does not occur in nature." "What course of action should I take?" I inquired. "What should I include in my report?" Dr. Nakamura gently set down the liver and met my gaze. "Document everything comprehensively. Photograph extensively. Take tissue samples from every organ displaying these patterns. We will forward them to toxicology for analysis of any unusual compounds. Additionally, we'll send samples to our consulting forensic pathologist at UCSF for a second opinion. Our priority is to determine if this played any role in her death, or if it represents some bizarre post-mortem alteration." "What about the cause of death?" I asked. "Complete the autopsy," he instructed. "Examine every detail. Perhaps you will uncover something that elucidates this anomaly. If not, we will have to list it as undetermined pending further studies." I dedicated another 3 hours to completing the most thorough autopsy I had ever conducted. Every organ system received meticulous examination. I collected samples from every tissue. I photographed everything from multiple angles. I documented measurements, weights, and descriptions in exhaustive detail. The only noteworthy findings, aside from the geometric patterns, were the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and the age-related changes one would anticipate in a 73-year-old woman. Nothing definitively explained sudden death, yet enough evidence existed for cardiac arrhythmia or an acute coronary event to remain plausible, even in the absence of visible infarction. By 2 p.m., I was concluding the procedure, suturing the Y incision, preparing Mrs. Ricks for transport by the funeral home. The following day, David assisted me with the cleanup, disposing of the biological waste, sterilizing the instruments, hosing down the table and floor. I returned to my office and commenced writing my autopsy report. This phase was invariably the most challenging, translating physical findings into precise medical language and formulating conclusions based on the evidence. But how does one compose a report about something utterly inexplicable? I extensively documented the geometric patterns, detailing their appearance, distribution, and characteristics. I noted their unknown significance and stated that tissue samples had been submitted for supplementary testing. For the cause of death, I provisionally ascribed atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease as the most probable explanation for sudden death in an elderly woman, but emphasized that the manner of death remained pending further investigation. Over the ensuing days, Margaret Hendress and those impossible patterns on her organs consumed my thoughts. I researched obsessively, consulting medical databases, forensic pathology journals, and toxicology references, anything that might shed light on what I had witnessed. My efforts yielded nothing. The toxicology results arrived a week later, negative for drugs, alcohol, carbon monoxide, heavy metals, and common poisons. We had specifically requested expanded testing for unusual compounds, industrial chemicals, anything that might elucidate the tissue changes. Every result came back negative. The tissue samples I had sent to UCSF were examined by Dr. Harold Chen, a forensic pathologist with 40 years of experience. His report arrived 2 weeks after the autopsy. Microscopic examination of tissue samples from multiple organs reveals unusual architectural changes in the capsular and serosal surfaces, it read. The tissue shows regular geometric organization of collagen fibers that does not correspond to any known pathological process, post-mortem artifact, or normal anatomical variant. The pattern appears to have been impressed into the tissue while the patient was alive, based on cellular response at the margins of the geometric structures. No similar cases found in literature review. Significance unknown. Recommend consultation with materials science or nanotechnology specialists to determine if exposure to engineered materials could produce these findings. Materials science. Nanotechnology. These were not terms I anticipated seeing in a forensic pathology report. Dr. Nakamura summoned me to his office after receiving Dr. Chen's report. Jennifer, this case has become considerably more complex. I've been contacted by individuals from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. They are approximately 30 miles from here, in Livermore. They conduct research for the Department of Energy, including weapons development, advanced materials, and similar endeavors. Evidently, they have been monitoring local medical examiner reports for specific keywords, and your case triggered their system. What keywords? I inquired. I'm not entirely clear, he admitted, but it pertains to the geometric patterns you documented. They wish to examine the tissue samples you preserved. They are being exceedingly insistent, operating through official channels, with the Department of Energy liaising with the county. Can they do that? I asked. If there's a national security concern, he explained, yes, they can request access to evidence in local investigations. I've dealt with them previously on a radiation exposure case. They are thorough, yet secretive. Do you believe Mrs. Ricks was exposed to something from the lab? I don't know, he replied. But Livermore is only 30 miles from where she resided. If there was any kind of release or accident, exposure is certainly a possibility. 2 days later, I met with Dr. Raymond Torres and Dr. Sarah Kim from Lawrence Livermore. They arrived in an unmarked government sedan, both dressed in business casual attire and displaying security badges. We convened in a conference room at the coroner's office, with Dr. Nakamura also present. Dr. Torres, a slender man in his 50s with graying hair, got straight to the point. "Dr. Martinez, we have reviewed your autopsy report and the photographs you took. We require access to examine the tissue samples you preserved. We believe Mrs. Hicks may have been exposed to materials related to our research." "What kind of materials?" I asked. Dr. Kim, a younger woman with keen features, answered cautiously, "We cannot disclose specific details, but we are developing metamaterials with unique structural properties. These are artificially engineered materials with arrangements of elements that do not naturally occur. Some of our research involves materials with regular geometric structures at the microscopic level." "And you suspect these materials somehow entered Mrs. Hendrix's body?" "We are actively investigating that possibility," Dr. Torres affirmed. 3 months ago, there was a minor containment breach in one of our facilities. A very small quantity of experimental material was unaccounted for. We have been monitoring for any unusual medical cases in the area since then." A containment breach. A chill ran down my spine. Are we discussing radiation? Chemical contamination? Not radiation, not in the traditional sense, and not a chemical poison, Dr. Kim clarified. This material is inert, non-toxic in the conventional meaning, but it possesses unusual properties concerning its interaction with biological tissue. Dr. Nakamura leaned forward. "If this material originated from your facility and caused Mrs. Hicks's death, this escalates into a public health issue. We need to ascertain if other individuals are at risk." "That is precisely what we are trying to determine," Dr. Kim stated. "We need to analyze the tissue samples to confirm if the material is what we suspect. Should it be confirmed, we could then investigate the manner of Mrs. Hendrix's exposure and ascertain if others face similar risks." We furnished them with the tissue samples under a formal evidence transfer agreement. While they pledged to share their findings, I harbored suspicions about the extent of their disclosure, given the national security implications. For the subsequent week, I delved into Mrs. Hendrix's background, attempting to unravel how she might have encountered experimental materials from a national laboratory. I interviewed her daughter Karen, who had discovered the body. "Did your mother work anywhere near Livermore?" I inquired, "or have any association with the national lab?" "No," Karen responded. "She was a bookkeeper for a plumbing supply company until her retirement 15 years ago. She never worked anywhere near Livermore." "Did she engage in any unusual hobbies? Anything that might have exposed her to industrial materials or chemicals?" "No, she was quite straightforward. She enjoyed gardening, watching TV, and reading mystery novels. Nothing out of the ordinary." "In the weeks leading up to her death, did she mention feeling unwell? Any symptoms?" "No, she seemed perfectly fine. I spoke with her by phone 2 days before she passed. She sounded normal, discussing her garden and inquiring about my children. Nothing suggested illness or distress." "Did she mention meeting anyone new, visiting any unusual places, or receiving any packages or deliveries?" Karen paused thoughtfully. "She did mention something peculiar about a week before she died. She said some men in a van had been working on the utility lines in her neighborhood. They were there for several days, going in and out of the access panels on the street. She thought they were from Pacific Gas and Electric, but she noted their uniforms looked different from the usual PG&E crews. This immediately captured my attention. Did she describe them in detail? Not really, just that they wore white coveralls instead of the typical PG&E colors, and their equipment was distinct. She observed them from her window because she was naturally curious and liked to know what was happening in the neighborhood. Following the interview, I contacted Dr. Torres at Lawrence Liverer and conveyed Karen's account of the utility workers. A long silence ensued. "We'll investigate that. Thank you for the information." "Were you searching for the missing material? Is that what those workers were doing?" "I cannot comment on operational details, Dr. Martinez, but we appreciate the information." 2 weeks after providing the tissue samples, Dr. Torres called with an update. "Dr. Martinez, we've completed our analysis. The material in Mrs. Hendrix's tissues is consistent with what was lost in our containment breach. It's a carbon-based metamaterial with a regular lattice structure designed for electromagnetic applications. How did it get into her body? We're still investigating, but we believe it became aerosolized during the breach and was released into the environment in very small quantities. It's incredibly light and can remain suspended in the air for extended periods. We think Mrs. Hendrix inhaled it. And then what? It just deposited itself in a perfect geometric pattern on all her organ surfaces? That's where this becomes unusual. This material possesses a property we call structural self-organization. When it comes into contact with certain biological surfaces, particularly membranes, it automatically arranges itself into its optimal configuration. It's a designed property intended to allow the material to form specific structures for our applications. We didn't anticipate it would do this inside a human body. Did it kill her? That's more difficult to answer. The material itself is non-toxic. It doesn't poison cells or cause chemical damage. However, the process of its organization on organ surfaces may have disrupted normal physiological function. We believe it might have interfered with cellular signaling or membrane permeability. In an elderly person with existing cardiovascular disease, even minor disruption could trigger a fatal arrhythmia. So, she died because she inhaled your experimental material, and it restructured itself inside her body. That's our working theory. But, Dr. Martinez, this information is classified. You cannot include it in your public autopsy report for national security reasons. The details of this material and its properties cannot be disclosed. Anger began to simmer within me. A woman died because of your containment breach, and you want me to cover it up? Not cover up. We want you to report the death as undetermined cause, possibly cardiac arrhythmia, in the context of coronary disease. That's medically accurate. You don't need to specify the trigger. We'll handle the investigation into the exposure pathway and ensure no one else is at risk. What about her family? They deserve to know what killed her. They'll be informed she died of natural causes related to heart disease, which is true. The specific mechanism doesn't alter anything for them. However, if this information becomes public, it could compromise national security research and generate unnecessary panic about materials that pose minimal risk under normal circumstances. I wished to argue, but I understood my predicament. The material itself was evidence in a national security matter. The investigation exceeded my jurisdiction, and from a medical standpoint, cardiac arrhythmia in the context of cardiovascular disease was an accurate cause of death, even if the trigger was atypical. My final autopsy report listed the cause of death as probable cardiac arrhythmia due to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and the manner of death as natural. I included a note about unusual tissue findings investigated through specialized testing, but I did not elaborate on the geometric patterns or mention Lawrence Livermore's involvement. The case concluded in November 2022. Karen Hendricks accepted that her mother had died of heart disease and held a modest funeral. Margaret Hendricks was cremated, which likely pleased the individuals at Lawrence Livermore, as it eliminated any remaining evidence of the metamaterial in her body. Yet I never forgot my first solo autopsy. I never forgot those impeccably geometric patterns adorning every organ surface, that lattice of artificial material arrayed throughout Margaret Hendricks's body, as if she were an unwilling substrate for an experiment. I continued my work at Alameda County, performing hundreds more autopsies in the ensuing months. I honed my skills, becoming efficient and thorough, proficient at determining causes and manners of death in cases ranging from the obvious to the enigmatic. But I always scrutinized organ surfaces with a bit more intensity, always wondering if I might encounter those patterns again. I never did. Whatever transpired with Margaret Hendricks appeared to be an isolated incident, the consequence of an accidental exposure to materials that should remain confined within a high-security research facility. Materials that interacted with biological tissue in ways that seemed almost sentient, organizing themselves with a geometric precision that nature never produces. At times, I ponder if the containment breach at Lawrence Livermore was genuinely as minor as they asserted. I wonder if other individuals were exposed to that metamaterial, and if their deaths were examined by medical examiners who either overlooked the subtle geometric patterns, attributed them to post-mortem artifacts, or simply lacked the magnifying glass at precisely the right angle to discern what I saw. I wonder if there are more Margaret Hendricks situations out there, individuals who died of natural causes, with no one realizing their bodies had become blueprints for self-organizing nanomaterials crafted in a weapons research laboratory. The most unsettling aspect isn't what I discovered in that autopsy. It's what I was instructed to omit from my report. It's the knowledge that truth can be classified, that deaths can be rationalized away for national security, that families can be fed comforting falsehoods, while the actual cause remains entombed in sealed government files. I persist as a medical examiner. I continue to open bodies and decipher the narratives etched in their tissues. I still provide answers to families and evidence to law enforcement, but I am now more acutely aware of the boundaries of what I am permitted to articulate, of the forces that can override my medical judgment and dictate what truth is deemed acceptable. My inaugural solo autopsy taught me that the deceased can unveil impossible realities, realities that challenge our comprehension of biology, physics, and what should be conceivable in the natural world. But it also imparted the lesson that some revelations are destined to remain concealed, classified, hidden behind national security protocols and official denials. Margaret Louise Hendricks passed away on September 16, 2022, in her Oakland, California home. The official cause of death is atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. The manner of death is natural. That is what the record reflects. That is what her family was informed. That is what anyone requesting her death certificate will read. But I know what truly resided within her body. I witnessed those geometric patterns, perfect and precise, coating every organ surface like a blueprint, like instructions, like something conceived by minds endeavoring to engineer materials capable of restructuring themselves in the presence of biological tissue. And I know that somewhere in a laboratory in Livermore, researchers are meticulously